Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today in the show, we have Jordan Fry. He's a plastic surgeon and he wrote the Kevin MD article, Why Do Physicians Fail to Focus on Their Personal Finances? Jordan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin. I'm excited to be here.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
Yeah. So I'm, as you mentioned, I'm a plastic surgeon based out of Buffalo, New York. I just finished my training, which was in New York City in July of 2020. So about 7-8 months ago now. And, my story beyond kind of clinically what I do came out of sort of at the end of my training, how I found myself, which was experiencing some burnout, which, we're recognizing is more and more common now. But a lot of that I realized was because of sort of financial, I guess I would say my lack of financial well-being. And I was sort of at the end of my training where I'd focus solely on, clinical stuff, becoming the best doctor I could. I was like $500,000 in debt. I was about to start a job. Everyone was telling me, oh, you're going to be fine. You're going to make all this money, all this stuff. I had like a 0% savings rate, wife, kids, no insurances, nothing in place. And I just felt totally like I was not going to be fine, despite becoming a high earning plastic surgeon. And so I ended up with my wife rededicating myself to financial literacy. And I realized that as my financial kind of well-being improved, that I became a better doctor. And I was still in my fellowship at this point. So it was not, I didn't make a cent more. I didn't do anything more except learn and begin to plan and figure out, how we could set our financial foundation. And I was so surprised about that. And so from that, I ended up starting blogging and writing and talking a lot about this with other people because I realized just how big a part financial well-being is of our overall well-being, but how often it's neglected by physicians. So that's sort of my interest, a big interest of mine outside of my clinical practice.
So, of course, we're going to dive into that in a little bit, but just let me first ask, during your medical school training and residency, how much financial education did you get, if at all?
Definitely nothing formal. There's sort of informal where we would have, which I think is relatively common, like during our residency, I'll put it like in air quotes here, financial advisors or insurance people would kind of come in and talk. And I realize now that the advice they were giving was not so sound and they were more so commissioned salespeople. So that was one aspect. And then there's, of course, like the advice you get from your mentors, sort of in the OR, there'd be our attendings talking to us about how they invest their money or, what we need to do or how we need to format our contracts and things like that, which is all well-intentioned. And some of it is very good. And some of it, in retrospect was not such great advice, but nothing formalized for sure.
So just to summarize that, the financial education that you got were from people who earn commissions and informally in the operating room.
Yeah.
And that advice itself was sometimes suspect. Is that
Yeah,
fair to say?
Hit or miss, to put it gently. Yeah.
All right. So let's get into that Kevin MD article, and it's titled, Why Do Physicians Fail to Focus on Their Personal Finances? And actually, before you get into the article, talk about that wake-up call or that light bulb going on that made you realize that you really needed to take care of your finances, and talk about that and then certainly get into your article after.
Yeah, I think it was just for so long, it was people, my wife or my parents or friends or whatever, where, they'd just be saying, oh, you're about to become an attending plastic surgeon. Like you're going to be just fine. Like you're going to be able to get this huge house, this nice car. You're going to be able to do all these things. The sort of like picture in someone's mind when they imagine a physician, just in general, and then a plastic surgeon on top of that, people have a certain image in their mind. And that's the same for plastic surgeons as well. And that's the image that I had. And I just did not see my life lining up with that. But also, I didn't really want my life to line up with that. Like I'm just not that person. And so I had this sort of like disconnect in my mind that was leading again to this burnout and this sort of just overall, I don't know what you would call it, but just discontent, because I felt I had to live up to this image that I couldn't live up to because of how, poor a position my finances were in, from me being just negligent of it and not understanding it and ignoring it. but also that I didn't even really want to live up to that image. That didn't jive necessarily with what made me happy, but I was trying to live up to it just because that's kind of what I thought you had to do. And so then I can't pinpoint necessarily one specific moment, but over a long time of introspection, just realizing like, hey, this isn't what I have to do. This isn't the way. I don't have to. If, cars to me are not super important to me. So I was planning to budget out and like put on loan this really expensive like luxury car. And so I had to go and think to myself and say, well, why the heck am I doing that? It's not even something that's bringing me joy. I ended up buying a used 2011 Toyota Avalon, probably not a ton of plastic surgeons out there driving that. But to me, I realized I don't really care about that. And I can use my money in a much better way to, bring joy to our lives currently, while also securing our financial future. So it's kind of a long-winded answer there.
Now, what about your peers during training? How much interest was there in financial literacy? Was there among your peers?
It was outwardly none. And I say that in the sense that throughout my training, it wasn't something that was talked about very frequently, certainly not on a very like serious or, educated level. There was a lot of kind of that, and in contrast to that, there was a lot of like emphasis on that consumerism or that physician image. Because I always used to laugh. We had, weekly conferences, like I'm sure every other residency program in the country. And we were probably the only one where like, every resident was trying to dress in the most expensive suits with expensive watches. Most other ones, you just show up in scrubs. But because we were to-be plastic surgeons in New York, it was very different. But then once I started learning about this, and I wasn't like blogging about it yet, but it was something that people knew I had begun to take an interest in. Then all of a sudden residents or even attendings were coming up to me on the side and saying, hey, Jordan, what do you think about this? Or, this is something I've been wondering about, or am I investing the right way? And that's when I realized there is this sort of underlying current of interest in it. But as physicians, we're so used to being right that we don't like to be wrong. And we feel embarrassed when we have to admit we don't know something. And finances is something we never learn about. And so how would we know anything about it? But still, just because there's that perception or that attitude among physicians, it can be difficult to bring that up and to open yourself up to learning about it, which often starts with just like facing our mistakes head on. And that was definitely the most difficult thing in my path, was like looking at everything I did wrong and really kind of summing up my financial situation, which was very difficult to look at first, but then that allowed me to move forward. So I think those are a lot of the roadblocks.
Now, what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes that you see physicians make financially?
Yeah, I can talk about myself because I made just about all of them, I'm sure a lot. But number one, we don't pay off debt. We look as debt as like just a way of life or a means to an end. And in certain respects, it can be that. But like I had $500,000 of student loans. I paid for college and medical school completely with loans. At the end of my residency, I ended up looking retrospectively and realizing that for every dollar that I did not pay off as debt my intern year, I had a 7-year training period, that decreased my net worth by $8 by the end of my training period. And so now I have a plan to pay that off aggressively. And I think I see too many people as attending stretching that out over 25, 30 years, not realizing that if you just sort of pay it off quicker, your cash flow increases immensely and you're just much more free to, within your practice, just kind of practice medicine on your own terms, which is a really important thing. And I think would change the future of healthcare in the country. So that's a big one. And I mean, this sounds kind of obvious, but even bigger than that is probably we just don't even pay attention to it. We're so easy to just say, oh, we'll just get a money person, just have someone else manage our finances. And unfortunately, most of the time, those people are not doing as good a job as we could be doing. Like, for instance, I'll just use as a quick example, investing in the stock market. We know, because there's been academic studies, 80% of the people who try to actively manage their stock investing do worse than people who just passively invest, which means just putting money in an index fund and letting it sit there, and once a year just rebalancing your percentages. Super easy. Any physician that got through medical school and residency can do that. but we just don't spend that time to get that initial knowledge, which will just allow us to, again, set our financial future, increase our financial well-being, become financially free, and practice medicine on our own terms, which is a better way to practice medicine.
How long did it take you before you became confident in managing your own money?
Yeah, it took me about 3 months, I would say. I started in April of 2020, where I this sort of, whatever you want to call it, enlightening happened. And my wife and I, we read a few books together. We started reading some blogs. And then at that point, we did have a financial advisor who was managing a very small amount of money that we had as our investments. Mm-hmm. And so we stepped away from him. We began managing all our own money. Now, obviously, we have a lot more money than we manage in terms of our investments, and we're paying off a lot of debt, as I mentioned, and we started investing in rental real estate properties, and we do that all ourselves.
And what kind of resources and books did you use?
Yeah, there's so many great ones. So I basically decided to go about this in a simple way, and I said, I'm going to read 10 pages of a finance book every day, and I'm going to read one blog post a day, because I was still in training, and I still do that today. I'm a full-time surgeon. Some of the books I started out with were The Millionaire Next Door, The Rich Dad Poor Dad book, The White Coat Investor book, Coffee House Investor. Those are great books. And then one that's a little more in-depth, but sort of like, if you read this book, you almost don't need to read another one, is The Bogglehead's Guide to Investing. And blogs that I started reading: White Coat Investor, Physician on Fire, Semi-Retired MD, Physician Philosopher. There's other ones I'm probably forgetting. There's a ton of great ones out there, and they all inspired me in starting what I do. And I think those are all amazing resources.
We were talking to Jordan Fry. He's a plastic surgeon, and he wrote the Kevin MD article, "Why do physicians fail to focus on their personal finances?" Jordan, one thing you said earlier was that being more financially literate made you a better physician. Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that?
It was amazing, because it's not something that I expected. And I can remember the moment I realized it. But, throughout my training, and I sort of have seen this in others, both in training and attending physicians for sure, when you have that financial stress, I mean, so many doctors are living paycheck to paycheck, despite being high income earners. And when you have that stress, the way you practice changes. I've talked to a friend of mine who I've met through this journey, but he admitted to, because of financial stressors in his life, rushing through patient visits, trying to see more patients, meet quotas, increase his RVUs. And once his financial situation changed because of, how he began managing his financial well-being, he didn't have to do that. And so that's one extreme example. But even in mine, like I said, I was just very stressed about what my financial picture was going to look like, how we were going to deal with moving, with getting a house, with getting new cars, with putting our kids through school, how I was going to manage all of that despite making a high income, because of my loan debt that I had, that we had a 0% savings rate, and that we were primed, if we didn't make a change, to just have lifestyle creep and overconsumerism rule our life. Once those things got managed, and I just had a plan, and I knew, hey, we have this plan that we actually wrote down, and if we follow it, we're going to reach all of our financial goals. Then that just totally unloaded that burden. That, again, even though I wasn't making a cent more at the time, I was still a fellow, but just knowing that I had that plan, that treasure map, I was able to focus so much more just in the moment of what I was doing all the time, which helps outside of medicine, but also helps immensely within the realm of medicine. Because when we're practicing, we all know those worries from outside our life, they don't go anywhere. And a lot of times they can just get magnified because we're in a high pressure situation and high stress situations. So it really, truly did have that effect. And that's kind of when I realized how important it was, and started thinking how much a change in my life and how much a change in medicine overall there would be if physicians were practicing, again, on their own terms as financially free doctors. And it would be huge.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
My take-home message is that worrying about money as a physician is not a bad or dirty thing, which is something that I thought up until, less than a year ago, mm-hmm. and that managing our financial well-being will make us better physicians.
And how can people reach you?
Yeah, you can reach me anytime. My website is prudentplasticsurgeon.com. You can contact me through there, or email is prudentplasticsurgeon@gmail.com, or I'm on all social media as Jordan Frey, MD, and it's Frey.
Jordan, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for everything you do and for having me.